Hello everyone, today we're revisiting an old video I made on the Ark Nova stats for the top 20 players on Board Game Arena. So the first video I made was back in August of 2023. I've done a couple of follow-up videos since then. The last follow-up video was in April 2024. I also did collect the stats in August 2024, but I didn't make a video because there weren't too many changes. But now in January 2025, I feel like we have enough changes that we can talk about it again. So basically, I just copy and pasted the stats from all the top 20 players on Board Game Arena, averaged them out, and this is the average of the top 20, this number here that you see for every stat. And then in comparison, we have the stats for just the average player on Board Game Arena, the stats for the top 20 from August 2023 and August 2024. So I guess we can start with just number of turns, just go top to bottom basically. Oh, we did get one sort of interesting insight with the introduction of Marine Worlds. So we actually know now that the stats on BGA count roughly your last 500 games. So we found that out with the addition of the sea animal icon stat. It's easy to work out. I think when it first came out, I played something like 7 sea animals, and I just divided whatever number it was, and it seemed like it was calculating it to about the last 500 games. So that also means some of the stats will be with players playing Marine Worlds. A lot of them have never played Marine Worlds. We can have a good idea from the sea animal stat, but we'll get to that later. So just number of turns. Well, we're set at the same thing every time. Top players finish the game in fewer turns than regular players. Nothing too surprising there. The trend has continued to go down. I'm a bit surprised it's gone down that much. I think this may also be in part to the alternative maps that got introduced. I feel like they've also helped lower the turn count quite a bit. Hey, Nethax. And yeah, I've also prettied up the spreadsheet from the last couple of editions, so thank you to Crops for helping with inspiration for that. Yeah, just lowest average turn at the moment is Song Chen. The highest average turn is actually Boxer with 32.64. And I think that has to do with the fact that he's played the alternative maps a lot less. There is a stat for the sort of map average, which is normally pretty useless, but it does give you an indication of who's played with the alternative maps and who hasn't. Because all the basic maps are numbered from just like 1 to 8, and the alternative maps are like 101 to 108. And I think most players here have been playing mostly with the alternative maps, but a few haven't played that many games with them yet. Number of breaks triggered. Numbers sort of gone up. Now it's back down slightly a bit. I think this is mainly just due to the improvement of the overall player base. It's also not a significant change, I would say. JD's unfortunately not in the top 20 at the moment, and I'll put that down to playing a lot of Marine Worlds. I think it's quite a lot swingier than the base game, so it's harder to stay at a top rank if you're playing Marine Worlds. I believe that's the case. But the top 20 players still cause more breaks than the average player. This could also be down to the top 20 players play basically only at 2-player count, whereas the average player is going to play solo games, 4-player games. In both those scenarios, in solo games, you're not triggering the break at all. In 4-player games, you're going to trigger it a lot less than in a 2-player game, so I think that's also partly to do with it. I collected the stats earlier today, so that was the cutoff I made. I wasn't actually sure that I was going to do this video, but we can see there is quite a significant difference between like the top breakers and the least amount of breakers. Like Sir Fluffy averages just over 2 per game, but Song Chen and Desire they average a lot, over 3, which is a crazy amount. I think, yeah, the majority of players are somewhere between like 2.2 to 2.7 seems to be. Trigger in the end of the game, again, this is the average player is going to be down due to solo and 4-player games, but also top players do just trigger the end of the game more often than the average player, just because they get to 100 more quickly, more efficiently, so they're going to trigger that end game more often. Stats have barely changed, but I also think this does give us a sort of good indication on the average strength of opponent that you have, because there are some players that are triggering the end of the game in 92% of cases, but they don't have like a lower average turn count than other players. Whereas someone like Propaganda Panda has a reasonable average number of turns, but is only triggering the end of the game 56% of the time. It suggests that he's playing against strong opponents more often. And we know that to be the case because he's red-thumbed basically half of the BGA player base, the weaker half, so he does face stronger opponents more often in Arena. Appeal, conservation, score, these are mainly just linked to number of turns. Generally, you'll find people that have a lower number of turns have a lower score, which makes sense. People that have a higher number of turns have a higher score, all related. And reputation has continued to go down as well from previous editions. I think that could be just due to the number of turns going down, obviously, but also due to the card upgrade rate going down, which we'll get to a bit later. But still, it's not a huge difference between the players. I guess I'm the lowest on 11.87. The highest is 13.29. We didn't play test this. Not a huge difference overall. This was all filled out manually, but it didn't take that long. Like, I didn't go highlight every cell. I learned conditional formatting for this video. Very useful. Okay, on to the number of actions. So I did point this out in the April video, the trend of build actions going down. It's continued to go down, which is not too surprising. Basically, all the actions are going down just because of turn count going down, but build in particular has taken the biggest hit, which is a good thing because building is an action that doesn't score you any points, so you want to be doing it as little as possible. Out of all these stats, I think Gushentail has the most interesting, whereas he has a really high number of build actions, and it leads into a super high amount of money gained and a lot of, like, if you look at this column, there's a lot of green on it, which means he's an outlier in a lot of different statistics. Like, even particularly upgrading build, one of the highest. So yeah, because build is upgraded the most, it does like to use it a lot more often, which generates a lot more income. But a lot of other players have adapted the sort of no upgrade build style, which means the number of build actions can go down. Animals actions, not too significant changes. Cards has gone down the second most amount, which is, I guess, similar reason to build. You want to avoid taking as many cards actions as you can because it's an action that doesn't score you any points. Obviously, you do have to at some point. But those are basically the keys to getting your average turn count down, trying to get to 100 points while reducing the amount of build actions and cards actions that you take. Congrats, friends. Association and sponsors actions, I don't think anything too relevant here. They've basically gone down in line with number of turns, or maybe they've basically remained consistent despite the number of turns going down. They've gone down a little bit. Little set that you won't find on Board Game Arena, extra actions. Basically just take the number of turns that you have and minus all these actions and X token gained instead of an action, and you get the amount of extra actions you have per game, which is things like determination from Eagle, any multipliers you get count as 2 actions, extra actions from things like from animals like the hippo. And I'm once again the extra action king 1.5. But you can see that, I mean, there are some outliers, like Sir Fluffy is down at 1.04, which is basically the same as the average player, which I find pretty surprising. Because I was going to say 1.3 is a lot higher than 1.03. So it just shows how powerful these extra actions are and that top players are using them more often than the average player. But apparently you can still do really well without them. I think Sir Fluffy has very interesting stats as well. Basically the opposite of Gush and Tail, with like money gained being the lowest out of everyone, and turn count being ridiculously low as well. I don't think we can really gain anything insightful from X tokens gained or used. Yeah, I don't think anything meaningful from the trend changes. I guess X tokens gained instead of an action, it's gone down a little bit, but I don't think it's that meaningful. There are some players that basically outright refuse to X-back an action, like 1 X-back every 2 games. So there's quite a big variance. Like, hard to understand is 1.64 per game. I'm sitting at 1.47, so I don't mind doing it. On to money. So money gained is also going to be sort of linked to number of turns and number of breaks. Can see like the average player gains more money than the top 20 players, but that's because the top players' games are on average 4 turns shorter and probably 1 whole break shorter as a result of that. But yeah, pretty big differences, like 187 to 149. And also we didn't playtest this at 185. But basically everything else is in line. Money gained through income, going to be high for those high players. Money spent on enclosures might be an interesting one to look at. This is basically telling you, it's telling you how many build actions you're doing, but also kind of relating to how many release projects you're doing, how early you're taking the 2-size enclosure reward. So if you're not spending a lot of money on enclosures like Propaganda Panda, it means, well, firstly, you're just building a lot less. Build actions is one of the lowest, but also you're just reusing those same enclosures or getting the 2-size reward a lot earlier. Money spent on donations is pretty interesting in that in August 2023, a SOS upgrade was so common that it was up at nearly 13 money per game. But in August, it took a massive hit down to 7.89, and now it's sort of gone back up slightly, but largely the same. Yeah, the association upgrade rate has definitely gone down in the last year and a half. But we will see that it's gone slightly back up again. Money spent playing cards from range. I'm actually a bit surprised that it's so low for new players. But yeah, certainly being able to play stuff from the display is really nice. Like, it's another way that you can cut down on cards actions. Just instead of drawing the card into your hand, then playing it, you can just play it directly. So you're saving an action, getting it into your hand and getting rid of it. So I think that is a big difference between the top players and the lower rated players, or the average player. Just saving that cards action, just playing stuff directly from the display. Cards actions, cards drawn from deck will be lower for the top players because of less cards actions overall and less number of turns. Like the difference between the average top 20 player right now and the average BGA player in cards actions is 4.89 to 6.09. So I think it actually does show that the average top 20 player is going to be drawing from the deck as opposed to snapping random cards. Also drawing more from reputation range. But snapping is higher, and that is going to be due to the snapping reward from the conservation projects. A lot of top players are taking that reward early. And you can see the massive difference. This is also something I talked about in the last video, but snapping was up from 3.31 to like 4.5, and now it's up even higher. So it shows that the top players are really rating that snapping reward from conservation projects. Discarded cards, nothing too useful. Thought it was funny that the outlier here is so massively different, outlier being 4.23 cards discarded. But we didn't playtest this, also draws the most from the deck by far, so it's funny that they sort of line up. You draw the most, you also discard the most. And I believe that's only discarding like during breaks, not drawing 3, discarding 1. I'm pretty sure that does not count. It would make sense that it doesn't count, because everyone's discarded should be much higher if that were the case. Played sponsors. So it's interesting that the average players in games over 4 turns longer, but they end up playing less sponsors than top 20 players, and that just shows the like real strength of sponsors. In particular, BDW, known as the Sponsor Man, 7.04. Ridiculous amount, honestly. The next closest player is Propaganda Panda on 6.34. And then Dwarven Time on 6.3. So I do not know how he gets so many sponsors and just plays them consistently. But yeah, on average, top 20 players are playing more sponsors. They're also going to know sort of which sponsors to prioritize, the better sponsors, which unfortunately there's no real stat that we can get to give that information out. And yeah, big difference between the lower players. Like Desire here again, played sponsors 3.83. That's also due to the high number of breaks being triggered. We see Song Chen is relatively low as well in played sponsors because of the number of breaks caused, so it makes sense that those are opposites. Played animals, I don't think there's anything too relevant here. Every player is between 9 and 10 rough, basically, except Sir Fluffy again, who is just another outlier here, 8.85. I don't really know how to explain this. It's not that different from everyone else. I mean, it's still quite significant, though. 8.85 versus 10.29. An animal and a half less per game. Craziness. Released animals, I think, is a huge one. So average BGA players do not release enough animals, and that's been clear from even August 2023. We can see the number of released animals has continued to trend upwards. And they're just really good projects to do. Basically, any conservation project is a good project to do, but release animals... I made a video on it, but they give you the enclosure back. They're often really good just point projects to do, as opposed to something like a breeding program. Release projects are oftentimes just better in terms of points. But then you also get the benefit of getting the large enclosure back or the small enclosure back to use again. And yeah, we didn't play test this Squish and Tell sitting at the lower end. The higher end, 1.34, 1.33 releases per game on average. So I mentioned it slightly at the start. This is based on the last 500 games of every player. That's how BGA keeps their stats. But that it's not set from periods of time. So someone who doesn't play a lot Like, I think Bu Bang Boom hasn't played a whole lot of games recently, so there's going to be a lot of older stats in those 500 games. And then someone like Sir Fluffy hasn't even played 500 games, so there's going to be a lot more variance in those stats. I think Sir Fluffy's at about 130 games or something played. Association workers. Kind of surprised me a bit that the average player gets more than the top players, but I guess not, because they're in games for longer. And looking down here at Partner Zoo Association tasks, they're a lot higher than the average players, even University Association tasks for that. So it really shows the difference between a top player and the average player. They're spending a lot less time grabbing partner zoos and universities, but they're spending a lot more time doing actual projects, which is a big difference because projects are how you get a lot of your points in Ark Nova. Donation tasks. It's a bit higher for the average player, but that's also just due to game length. And I think they also do upgrade association more. Yeah, we will see that later. That's also part of the reason for these increased number of partners doing university tasks. And yeah, number of projects. Really important to do as many projects as you can. Even the lowest of the top 20 players is sitting at 3.83 compared to 3.37 for the average BGA player. So that's something that all the top players have in common. Minimum 3.83 projects, most is 4.29. But everyone's basically between that sort of small threshold there. On to building. Nothing too surprising. So we're going to see the build upgrade rate has gone down significantly, which means the average top 20 players building less enclosures, building less kiosks, building less pavilions. All those are going down. And yeah, obviously going to be lower than the average player, although funnily enough, built pavilions is still higher than the average player. So I've always been a big believer in building pavilions. I do notice a lot of lower rated players build kiosks when it's like the last or second last round, and they have very little impact at that stage of the game. But yeah, pavilions at least always give you a point. So even at the end of the game, they're giving you something like tangible to help you cross, whereas a kiosk does nothing towards the end of the game except maybe help you fill a map. Unique buildings is an interesting one. So this is just sponsor buildings. I think we figured out that it was sponsor buildings, but not things like an Avery, Reptile House, Petting Zoo, but this is just sponsor buildings. So no surprise that BDW is sitting in the highest at 1.93 because he plays the most sponsors. I'm a little bit surprised that this number is quite a bit higher than the average player. I guess there are a lot of good sponsor cards that have a building attached to them. Things like Penguin Pool, Meerkat Den, Polar Bear Exhibit, those sort of point scoring ones. So top players are going to prioritize those cards more often, and as a result, place more unique buildings down. And I guess that's also the reason that more hexes are being covered than the average player, just due to the bulkiness of the sponsor buildings. Alright, action cards is the interesting one. So the trend of upgraded action cards has continued to go down, and that's now due to the emergence of taking the worker at 2 conservation points. That's been a massive reason for number of upgrades going down. So obviously, if you're taking the worker instead of the upgrade at 2 conservation points, then you can only get a maximum of 3 upgrades, and that's if you get all your universities and partner zoos. And I expect next video, whenever that will be, this trend will continue to go down even further. Because 3.71 is still quite high, I think. You have players like Sir Fluffy again, 3.43. Dwarven Time, 3.58. Panda Paladin, 3.54. A lot of low numbers there. This can definitely go down a lot. But yeah, the average player, 3.84, does suggest spending too much time grabbing partner zoos, universities, and as a result getting upgrades. But then also not even upgrading the right sort of thing, because animals has been the consensus most upgraded for a long time. Well, I guess build was actually really highly rated before in August 2023, but yeah, last stats that we collected, animals was clearly still the most important at 98. It's still the most important right now at 97%. It's gone down slightly. But build has taken a massive hit once again. So build went from 99% to 92% to now 79%. And it's still being propped up by some players that upgrade at most games, like Nico, Gush and Tail. We didn't playtest this. View Bang Boom 100% of the time. Whereas you have players like Propaganda Panda 42%, Dwarven Time 58%, BDW 58%, Sir Fluffy 55%. Mine's currently at 70%, but I think if it were to take my last 100 games into account, it would be closer to about 40%. So this number will continue to go down. And yes, I mean, it just shows that there's two clearly successful playstyles that still work, like the conventional upgrade build, most games, compared to the now new emerging not upgrading build. And what I like about that is the reason that I don't upgrade build is because I can reuse a lot of the same enclosures by releasing a ton of animals, and then also making sure to get that 2-size enclosure reward nice and early. I'm always taking that basically first or second every single time. Upgraded cards has gone down slightly, but you can still see there's not a huge gap between the lowest and the top, I guess. The lowest is actually Dwarven Time at 75%, but even that's not that ridiculously low. I guess we didn't playtest this. The top is at 97%, is quite high. Yeah, but even going back to August 2023, it was 90% for every player. Yeah, I think the main reason for not needing upgrade build is, yeah, exactly what I just said. Just getting the 2-size enclosure reward. If you get that and maybe like one release a game, which I think is reasonable to average, then you just don't need to build that often. Maybe you can spend your unupgraded build action building a 5-size enclosure, and then you have enough enclosures to fit like one big animal, one small animal every break. That's really all you need. Upgraded sponsors has continued to go up. 29% to 48% to 55%. And it's still the upgrade that has the most variance, I guess, between all the players. BDW is sitting at the most, along with Propaganda Panda at 80%. But then you have some players that rarely upgrade it, like Desiaxia again at 26%, Nico at 37%. Then you get to the average player and it's at 38%. So I think it shows that the average player is not really comfortable playing ASOS upgraded games, although I will say I think this is a lot higher upgrade rate than it was a year ago. Actually, I can probably check that. In August 23, oh god, that was so ugly back then. No, I guess I lie. The average player upgraded at 40%. November 2023, the average player upgraded sponsors 33%. So hasn't really changed that much for the average player. Well, that's something we'll touch on with the bird icons, actually. Upgrade association rate has actually started trending up again. And for me personally, I think it's been trending up again. Because what I do like to do now is upgrade sponsors and association together. Typically, in an older playstyle, you'd pick one or the other because it was so important to get animals, build, and cards upgraded that you sort of had to upgrade those three and then pick one of these two. But that's definitely changed. Now I think it's a really strong combination to upgrade both of them. So I will typically try to do that at the expense of maybe build and potentially cards. But I do expect the association upgrade rate to go up by the next stats video as well. You can still see it's pretty high from the average player, so it's more that older conventional style of picking association over sponsors and then doing the others, although I think the average player does need to upgrade animals a bit more often, because by not doing that, you're missing out on great animals like eagles, rhinos, half the rhinos. And out of all these stats, Surf Fluffy is once again the outlier, upgrading Assos the most at 73%. The lowest here is 50 Grosh at 38%. And just on to the tags of everything. These are just tags in your zoo at the end of the game. So like for my board, my stats personally, I'm red on basically everything, but I believe that's because I release the most amount of animals. You can see Dwarven Time Zero similar, red on basically every icon, whereas the players who release less will just finish with more icons in their zoo. But it does give you a good idea of how the top players rate every continent on average, which hasn't really changed that much. Asia's still the most prevalent. You can see Americas and Africa behind that. It's actually equal for the average player, but the top 20 players do prefer the Americas icons over the Africa icons. Europe and Australia are naturally going to be lower because there are less of those icons in the game. There are no Europe or Australia primates, so there's just less opportunities to play those cards. And that also means less of a reason to get those partner zoos, so it just naturally happens that you get less of those tags. I do find Gushen Tales pretty funny that basically everything is green here. Asia's green, Africa's green, Australia green, America's green, which we expect because he releases one of the fewest amount of animals, but just randomly Europe is just completely red. 1.56 is the lowest out of every player. So it has something against Europe. I'm not sure what it is. Yeah, also the biggest Africa lover, and no, Bubang Boom is the biggest Asia lover. Who's the biggest Australia lover? Paladin at 2.21. That's a very high number. So bird icons. Birds have long been thought of as the most powerful species type in the game. And I think part of the reason that we were seeing this number really high is with upgraded build comes the ability to build an aviary, but now with build being upgraded less, we're seeing less aviaries. So I think naturally that means the number of birds is going to go down, and will probably go down further by the next stat video. And the funny thing about upgrading build less is it actually makes herbivores more appealing because of the flocking ability, which is another way that you can bypass more releases. Number of bears is a big one. So it's remained consistent over the year and a half for top players, but for the average player, they're still heavily underrating bears. They are just all of them, nearly all of them. I would say all of them. They have very powerful abilities and just great point bombs. So top players know the value of bears, and you can see even the lowest top player here, Sanctuary at 80%, still higher than the average player at 75%. Then you have Hard to Understand at at not percent, 0.8 per game. You have hard to understand at 1.01 bears per game, which is a crazy amount. Which is a good thing. Big fan of bears. Reptile slightly down. I don't think really due to the fact that reptile houses aren't getting built. I don't think reptile houses were that common to see anyway, compared to aviaries. But just going down slightly, same as all the other tags, and primates will be the lowest apart from bears because there are just less primates in the deck than other species types. Petting zoo has often been a divisive tag. Can see some players really love them, like Gushentail, 1.05 per game. That is crazy. But then you have players like me at 0.34 per game. We didn't play test this at 0.37 per game. And you can see the average player still builds more of them, but it's more of a play style thing. I think you can be successful either way. The reason that I personally don't play that many petting zoos is because the only project they can relate to is species diversity, which means if you have something like an Africa project, an Asia project, a predator project, petting zoos are not going to help with that. Sea animals, we can't really read much into this, but it does give us a good indication of who's been playing marine worlds and whose stats are affected by that. So we didn't play test this, has pretty abnormal stats, I guess, irregular stats compared to everyone else, and a lot of that's going to be due to playing a lot of marine worlds, averaging 0.86 sea animals per game. To give you an idea, I guess a lot of you would know that JD has been playing a ton of marine worlds. He's sitting at something like 1.6 sea animals per game. So we didn't play test this is playing about half as much marine worlds as JD is. But you can see there are a lot of people that haven't played it at all on their accounts. I'm sitting at 0.21, and I mostly play those games on stream, so you guys kind of have an idea of how much I've been playing it, which is still a lot more than other players. So I'll be well prepared when it comes into Arena, most likely next season. It was leading the vote last time I checked. And the funny thing is with Marine Worlds, it also boosts your water icon value a lot. Can see the more sea animals, more water icons. That's because building the aquariums to fit the sea animals in gives you a water icon. So yeah, can also see Desirexia has the second highest number of water animals, also the second highest number of sea animals. Water icons, sea animals. But for some reason, even though I have been playing a decent amount of marine worlds, my water icons are still kind of low, and I'm not sure why. It's probably actually a kind of weakness that I need to work on. It's possible that it's messing up my map, leaves no room for water icons towards the end of the game, so that might be something that I need to fix. It could also be just because I'm releasing more animals. Can see that also Dwarven Time's kind of low, releasing a lot, but BDW is very high and releasing just as much as us, so Rock icons, everyone's kind of the same, and that's not a huge amount of difference. But just with the way that the Ark Nova animals are balanced, if your animal does have a rock or water requirement, then the game takes that into account. The balance takes it into account. So animals with those requirements cost less money than animals without those requirements. So when you are playing a water or rock animal, they are discounted. They're good value. Finally, science icons. No surprises, BDW is number one there. Most sponsors played. Yep, naturally going to have most science icons. And then, yeah, you have the lower ones, the ones that break the most have the least amount of science icons. So I think nothing too surprising. Realize you missed the whole thing. Oh, I'm wrapping it up now. I don't want to make the stream too long because I think it should be a short and snappy sort of stats video. But yeah, we've just gone through the whole thing. Lucky it'll be there on the VOD. But I mean, I guess if anyone has any questions now, feel free to ask. But I don't think there was anything else that I planned to talk about. I think we covered pretty much everything. So yeah, main meta changes. Upgrading build would be the biggest one, going down a lot, and also upgraded action cards in general continuing to go down because of 2 CP worker. I'd say those are the main two talking points. Do I think this will impact my decisions? This edition, probably not. But the August 2023 video I made when I was just starting out did influence a lot of what I did. That helped me climb a ton, just sort of comparing my stats to the other top 20 players, seeing the differences. The biggest one I got back then, which I can actually go back and have a look. This is just my own stats across, but released animals was massive. I was so far behind every other top player at 0.46. So that's something that I actively did try to work on, and now I'm sitting at 1.34. And yeah, also as a result, conservation projects, I was so far behind everyone else. So I did actively try to work on those things. And yeah, that did help me a lot. Which order to upgrade the actions? It depends a ton on the game. Often, if you are going to be upgrading sponsors, it would typically be your first upgrade. But there are certainly games where it's fine to upgrade any action card first. The action card I'd probably upgrade the least amount first is cards, just because the main reason you do that is for the 10 reputation, getting past that, but that doesn't often need to be done first. I think the main reason you'd upgrade Association first is to try to help you win the race to a 5 or 8 CP reward, something like a Partner Zone 5. If you have a mid-sized release, upgrading a SOS and then donating once can be a good way to get there. And the reason you'd upgrade animals first is oftentimes to get from something like 4 to 5 reputation if you start with double universities or something. But there are certainly good reasons to upgrade any action card first. It depends on the game state. For the sort of augmented action cards or the Marine Worlds action cards, you can see from these stats that most of the players play without them. But in future editions, there's no real stats for the different action cards, so we won't really be able to tell. So I was also thinking just the number of Marine Worlds games is impacting how much money that we didn't playtest this is getting, because there are a lot of the Marine World action cards that give you money, like the money sponsors, building over rock and water, sunbathing sponsors, things like that. But then Gush and Tell sitting over here at like barely playing Marine Worlds, not playing it at all, and just sitting on 187 income money gains per game, which is crazy amounts. Yeah, playing the most animals, releasing the least, building the most enclosures, covering the most hexes, building the most, not even the most chaos. So I mean, this is a clear indication of Marine Worlds building that many chaos and pavilions. That's the build action cards. Build chaos, build pavilions. You can clearly see those stats coming through. How much faster is Marine Worlds to the base game? Actually, there is one way that we can have a look at that. I think it'd be a pretty good way of telling. Because I don't know enough about, we didn't playtest this. So I can't, they have a reasonable number of turns. I can't tell if it's lower because of Marine Worlds or that they're actually just a decent player and they're like, it's hard for me to tell. I mean, obviously they're a decent player because they're in the top 20. JD, number of turns 32.3. Back in April 2024, average number of turns 32.73. So there's definitely some room for just natural improvement there, which we see out of most players between August, November, April. As average number of turns has gone down, but it's currently sitting at 32.3. So could suggest Marine Wells is going to be faster. One would expect it would be faster because of the special action cards, but I'm not 100% sure because it could also lead to sort of slower playstyles. Like if you have money sponsors, breaking one to get money and stay in a round longer, that could lead to more turtling playstyles. So I think it'll be interesting to see for the next edition just how much Marine World does impact turn count. I think it would make the games faster on average. Yeah, less money on enclosures due to two sides reward and releasing more animals. Definitely releasing animals is a huge part of it as well. And I guess also part of it would be newer players overbuilding, like building empty enclosures that they don't end up using, which does sometimes happen to top players, but not as much. Oh yeah, I can also see that the average BGA player is playing a lot of Marine Worlds, more than anyone on this top 20 list. So actually, yeah, it shows how popular it is, actually. But definitely when you do play Marine World, you want to be playing a lot of these sea animals because they are such good value cards. So I guess it's also impacting the average player stats a lot because they are actually sitting at the most Marine World games out of everyone. And that's true as well, like the Marine World universities, you're a lot more incentivized to get all three universities, so that could be part of the reason that we're seeing the average player get more universities. Just wonder what the numbers were like before. August 2023, it's very ugly still. I mean, the number hasn't changed for all players 2.24. It's been roughly the same throughout. But yeah, I'm a big fan of the Marine World unis as well, the animal unis. That's also something that's going to lead to a faster turn count because it's really hard to get screwed out of an early project. Typically, when there's habitat projects and you're both fighting for the Europe partners or something, one of you gets or one of you doesn't. But if there's also a Predators project open at 2, then you can just take Predator Uni and just do that at 2 next round. Pretty useful. Stream is going well, but we are about to wrap it up. We are done for the day. Not sure when we'll be doing the next edition of this. Maybe in about 6 months or so. I'll collect the stats and see if there's anything to talk about, but I think there was enough to talk about for this edition. So anyway, thanks all for watching. Kind of related, but we sent out a questionnaire sort of survey to the Emu Cup Season 2 participants that has a lot of, I guess, questions that a lot of people wonder about, such as strongest card, weakest card, most overrated card, and then sort of yes/no questions like, do you prefer rock or water? Do you prefer 10 money or 3x tokens? So there'll definitely be a video coming out on the Emu Friends channel when we get all those results. And there's some pretty fun answers there, so that's kind of related to this, but look out for that video. I'll probably link it in the description here when it eventually does come out. But yeah, thanks all for watching, have a good rest of the day, and see you guys on Sunday for the BGA stream. Bye.